Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last show of 2020. Wow. And what a year it's been. You know, who'd have thought? I think some things were known. We were going to be sort of careering towards the end on Brexit, and we knew we were going to have the US elections. We didn't know exactly how that would go. But with COVID and Black Lives Matter and so many other things in this year, what a year it's been. So you might remember that Martin McFly and Doc Brown went to 2015, they went to 1955, they even went to 1885. And it's just as well that they didn't ever go to 2020, because that would have been a very, very different movie. So in that context, as you know, for those who are coming back, the purpose of this show is to be inspired and find a bit of resilience when life and work isn't perfect, by hearing how some amazing people have achieved what they've achieved and found the resilience and bounce back and pivot. And always remember that message from our faithful Dr. Zeus book. You will be brilliant, you will be successful, you will be content. Thanks, Jeremy. You'll be all of those things and more, but not every day or week or month or year or project or relationship. And so we've had some amazing guests that have really brought that to life. But honestly, I can't think of a better way to end the year than with Jeremy Connell-Waite. So very welcome, Jeremy.
You're welcome. Happy Friday. Nice to see you. Thanks for inviting me over.
So I'll do a bit of an intro just to tee up Jeremy, so that you understand sort of what he's done in the world. So I said in the trailer, actually, if you saw it, that Jeremy's journey is like an Aladdin's cave of treasure. And so let me explain that a little bit. So his day job is communications designer at IBM. And that sort of really means Jeremy has to frame how IBM is going to revolutionize the future. It's pretty awesome. That makes Jeremy a marketer, a storyteller, a technologist, a futurologist, and many more rolled into one. But actually, that's just a platform for many other superb things outside. And so Jeremy, just to name a few, is a climate action ambassador, which means that he looks to inspire change around climate issues. Multi-published author, has owned his own agency in the past, worked for some other great companies, tech companies, has his own podcast, and been voted the most influential person on Twitter for #BigData. And one of the top 10 most influential marketing professionals globally. And so that's why I don't know if it's a title that's been coined before, but I coined Jeremy as the king of side hustles. And you hear about some of those side hustles and the whys and wherefores around them. But also I know it hasn't been perfect along the way. It never is. I mean, that's true for everybody in the world. And so hopefully today we get a little look inside the Aladdin's cave to hear about Jeremy's adventures. So very welcome, Jeremy. And I'll hand to Ritchie to get us started.
Hey, well, thank you very much. And Jeremy, it's so awesome to have you on. My God, last show of 2020. What a way to end the year. Jeremy, you know, in some ways, I'm quite intimidated to have you on as the last show of the year, because you are like a mastermind storyteller. And in fact, anybody who's seen you on LinkedIn, you post amazing sort of infographic drawings of presentations and then how people do things in that sense. So, you know, I hope you're not judging us too much on this show, because today is all about you. So look, clearly we are still in the midst of the crisis. Doesn't seem to be easing up despite end of lockdown. Most of us sitting in sort of tier 3 sort of territory. Not sure what that's going to bring for Christmas and post that. But hey, love to hear from your perspective how the year's been, perhaps how the last couple of weeks have been. I know your holiday's been scuppered up, but besides that, what else has been going on in your world?
It's been a weird one, isn't it? It's going to be super strange looking back on this. I mean, we started off with the first lockdown, you know, we were in hospital. You know, when you looked at the first spike, when no one had a clue what was actually going to happen, and all the nervousness around, what is this? Is this a long-term thing? Is it, you know, I've got identical twin girls, you know, I've got 4-year-old twin girls, and we were taken to hospital. We were, you know, 999 ambulance trying to go in the middle of the night with a super high temperature, but blue lips and, you know, blue toes, and it was terrible. It was really rough. We were on hold for 20 minutes on 999. You know, we had a 6-hour response rate to try and get 111 to come back. And this, because, you know, she's 4 years old, and this is a little baby that's had a lot of troubles when she's been growing up as well. So that's kind of the world really kicked off. And it's strange, actually, because almost the last 10 years of my career completely pivoted on March. So we had all the health stuff and COVID, but also I'll never forget the day, the 5th of March, we had what was our last in-person event at IBM in front of all of our partners, when I just thought, you know what, this isn't working for me. I need a new career. I need to find a role that actually makes sense of all of this stuff that's going on in the world. And I've been trying for years to make my perfect job. So I actually did a job interview on stage. They didn't realize that's what was happening. But I did a presentation as a job interview to 500 partners at the Emirates for one of our conferences. And since the 5th of March, the year has just completely changed. Got a totally new job, completely new team. The girls are super happy. Changed everything about the way that I work, the way my team works, IBM works. It's been quite something. It's been very messy, just trying to make sense of stuff. That's really the only reason I do those great big drawings. It's not actually to share. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome of like, you know, it's a little bit too vulnerable giving away your notes, taking a picture of your notebooks. They're kind of intimate, right? But I don't know. I like the idea of just drawing thing longhand to slow my brain down and to try and remember stuff. Just the process of trying to write stuff down helps you to remember it now, not to remember it later. And I've just found that to be incredibly cathartic, just to make sense of whatever's going on. So whatever my thing is that week, that becomes, I've got my big A2 pad down here, that becomes this week's drawing. So just trying to make sense of stuff, you know.
Already a top tip from memory.
Sorry, Richie. So Jeremy, I mean, it's you described briefly, you know, a roller coaster of a year. I mean, it's been crazy. You think differently around problems. So I'm interested to hear what you think some of the silver linings will be as a result of COVID. What's beyond the obvious?
I'm sure this has been shared in various different ways, but for me, it just comes down to that there's lots of things that stem underneath it, but it's mental health, really. I think bearing in mind, I mean, the caveat is there's a lot of people listening from different walks of life, different sizes of companies. I work for a ridiculously big company. It's a very old company. It's 109 years old. We've got 350,000 employees. So when my job is to try and help IBM employees, we call them IBMers, to change the way that they tell stories, that's not a small job. You know, my team goes in on the big deals to try and fix a lot of that. What often happens in big companies, though, is that the company tells you how to work, you know, and you've got, you know, just like any traditional consulting firm, you may have hours plans and you've got optimization and you want to bill a certain amount of stuff. And here's how you should work. Here's the box that you fit in, you know. And what's happened this year is it feels to me that there's been a huge power shift back towards the employee, where the employees are now back in control about what a work-life balance should actually look like. And as someone with ADHD, which is always a struggle at work, sometimes it feels like a superpower, sometimes it feels like a huge disability. 3% of the population have it. Most of them don't realize. 8% of high performers have it. A lot of those guys don't realize if you knew, it would completely change the way that you worked. But what's happening since lockdown, obviously all of the caveats and health issues aside, what it's done is that we've kind of dictated our own terms about how we work and why we work. And I think it's probably increased for most people, you know, the good relationships that they have gone better, probably looking after your health a bit more. I'm certainly cycling a lot more. But I'm also very conscious that some of the younger people that we have in our organization are also struggling. They might be sharing a house with 5 people in Shoreditch somewhere, right? How nice for me to be on a separate floor of my house in a lovely office that's nicely soundproof, surrounded by whiskey and toys and books. Some of my friends are in a cupboard, you know, with loads of other people on Zoom in the house share. And that's hard. So I think what it's done is it's pushed us into a corner to literally find a work-life balance that actually works on our terms. And I don't think that's ever going to change. You know, I mean, what was it back in March, April? We talked about next normal, new normal, and all those buzzwords that we hate. It's not going to go back, is it?
No, absolutely. But I want to take you back, quite frankly. So you really started at, well, you're currently at IBM. And you know, it's funny because obviously we've known each other for years. Certainly going back to your Salesforce days, perhaps even when you were just starting out there. And you've got a fascinating career sort of journey. And, you know, I'd love to hear some of those pivotal moments, perhaps some of those highs and lows, and what you've learned along the way.
How long have we got for that? I think I just mentioned imposter syndrome, but I was looking back on the list of the people that you've asked that to, you know, like Gemma and Ritson and Pete Markey and Pullman. It's I do have huge imposter syndrome. I'm not traditionally trained. I dropped out of university. I was a cliche that dropped out to go and set up the agency. I tell you, the most this is embarrassing, but the most pivotal moment was probably 14, 15 years old at high school. I'm from Manchester, the dodgy part of Manchester, Salford, which was a pretty rough school. And we had to learn how the stock exchange worked. So we had fictitious money. And I just became obsessed with Wall Street, right? You remember in Gordon Gekko? And I bought the red braces. I had red braces. I was cutting around wanting to. So I'm this 14-year-old kid from Salford going to my local shop that obviously didn't sell a Financial Times because it's, Salford and nobody bought it. They had to order it in for me. They're like, what's this kid doing with this paper? I had no idea. I couldn't understand it. And I was hoping that by some sort of osmosis, I'd understand the financials because I wanted to be a stockbroker. So that was my trajectory. I was going to City University. I was going to study investment banking. I was going to go into the stock exchange. And I realized very quickly that whilst I love people and numbers, that career would have killed me. In fact, do you remember, I saw Neil Gaiman last night shared all of his favorite movies of hope, and Pursuit of Happiness was one. Have you guys seen the movie Pursuit of Happiness? You remember Chris Gardner? Do you remember that scene with the Ferrari? I think it's the 350 GTO. And it's outside the office, and the Will Smith character, Chris Gardner, goes up and asks him, got 2 questions for you. What did you do and how, Yeah, and he says, you've got to go to college. You've got to, and he's like, no, you've got to be good with numbers, good with people. And that really just set me on a trajectory into marketing completely by accident, only because I loved numbers and I loved people. I wanted to study theology and maths. So how do large groups of people behave? And then how do you put an economic value on that? So that was my agency. The agency went horribly bankrupt, very badly. One of them grew too fast. One of them, business partner, runs away, leaving a whole trail, including repossessions, losing everything, ex-wife, ex-best friend, and a huge car crash coming back from a meeting where I should have died, head on, 80 miles an hour car crash on the M6. And in the middle of all of that, you kind of take stock, right, about what you want to do. So I went into the corporate world just to dust myself down. So I was one of the first heads of social media in Europe for Phones for You. And just through the course of spending a lot of time with Facebook and trying to understand this strange marketing industry that I'd not been trained in, at the time, you remember all the marketing clouds are exploding. So I become head of social at Adobe, help them to build out their marketing cloud. How do we articulate where marketing is going to go? That took me to the team at Salesforce, which was doing the same thing. What's the messaging around Salesforce's marketing cloud? How do they go to market? And IBM ended up doing exactly the same thing. The irony is that I didn't actually go to IBM to set up their marketing cloud and to be an evangelist, although that's what I ended up doing. I went there because Watson, their AI engine, saved the life of my twins while I was at Salesforce. And I didn't know that it was IBM at the time, and I'm being recruited by IBM while I'm at Salesforce, right? So it was just a strange journey that I could have never engineered any of that. Each moment I thought that was it. Next 20 years of my life would be an agency. Phones for You was a very, very bad company for a lot of reasons, but I thought that was my corporate life. I thought I'd actually go back to be an entrepreneur again, but I'm not cut out to do that. And I got to know people like Solis and Galloway and Vaynerchuk, really well. Thought maybe that's a career I'd like, which is where books and speaking came from. Realized that's the last thing in the world I want. Got to know people like Sinek quite well. And that's really where everything came together for me. Not the why, but the idea that my job isn't to be in front of camera. My job is to help other people do their job better. So I've completely stolen Sinek's mission in life and made it my own, which is to inspire other people to do what inspires them so that together we can change our world. And that's been it. So that's exactly what I do at IBM. I just try and inspire other people to do good work with technology.
Jeremy, that's a wonderful recount of an amazing journey. Thank you for your transparency and honesty. It's great to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's lots of lovely comments, but I'm just going to read out one from Nick Noble. Thank you, Nick. Jeremy is in a constant state of constructive reinvention, which inspires change wherever he goes. His superpower, though, is that he's generous with it. He teaches as he goes, even when it isn't his job. Why does he work that way? So I'm going to sort of do a bit of a twist on the question, actually. You mentioned ADHD, and frankly, it's brilliant that you mentioned that out loud. I campaign a lot around neurodiversity. and destigmatizing it is the first job.
Mm-hmm.
So it may link to Nick's question about why you work that way, but what do you think ADHD brings positively to your capabilities and impact?
Hyperfocus. You can, there is elements where things that I think are normal, other people think are quite an extreme of not normal. The way that I can retain information, photographic memory, especially around stats, memorizing very long keynotes. In fact, Nick, one of the keynotes I remember doing with Nick, I had to memorize an 8-minute monologue in case Watson broke down when I'm doing a voice demo. So I've got to memorize a script off by heart so I can flip the demo to a click-through demo, not a live demo. But every single word I say has to be in place, because otherwise I'm going to be embarrassed in front of a large audience. ADHD kind of gives you the superpower to be able to do that. I mean, it is the ability to hyper-focus. The problem is it's often described like you've got 37 TV channels going off in your head all at the same time, and somebody else is in charge of the remote control. And it's emotionally exhausting, because that thing that becomes the most important thing in a world, climate would be a great example. I'm super hyper focused on that. Lucky enough now to work with Al Gore. That was a lot of hyper focus in a very short amount of time. When I'm feeling imposter syndrome because these climate scientists from NASA have been doing it 20 years that didn't get to the showcase and the influence that I had in some of those meetings. But the downside is, when that hyper focus switches off, that thing that you really, really cared about, literally 30 seconds later, you couldn't give a shit. It's like, I have no interest in that thing now because I'm over here. So I'll try and set down. Happened this week. Jeff Koons just dropped a new masterclass, one of my favorite artists. I'm like, great, 3 hours with my notebook and a glass of whiskey and Jeff Koons showing me how to make art. And I must have got about 30 seconds in and I was off on YouTube watching chess videos. Yeah. And yet literally 2 minutes before, that was the only thing that mattered. And that's what's exhausting. So being able to manage that and then making sure that the people around you are aware that that's how your brain works. What you do is you start filling your team in with people that have that can strengthen your weaknesses. So I've stopped worrying about this chip on my shoulder of I'm not very good at this stuff, especially admin, because I'm never going to be good at that. Some people take drugs to manage it. I don't need to. I've managed my life in a slightly different way. But I know that where my superpower is, I can do some stuff there really well. And I'm lucky enough to work at a huge company that can have a lot of impact in a short amount of time. So I try and channel the superpower where it's going to work and mitigate as much as I can against the clicking off. And for me, that's coming off social media and cycling a lot to keep my brain in a good place. And I read at least one book a week, and I write everything longhand with a fountain pen to slow my brain down, which is why I do those notes. And
Jeremy, I actually want to pick up on the thought around social media, and we caught up slightly before the show around your lack of presence for the last couple of months. But before we dive into that, I'm testament to you, because there's so many new faces on the show and names on the show. I just want to do a few shout outs first. People all around the world. So we've got Michelle from Bournemouth, Avnish from India, we've got Christina from New Zealand, all very, very welcome. We've got Daniel from Devon. Where else? We've got Andrew from North Ferriby, East Yorkshire. There we go. David from Battersea, London. Eno from Germany. Nick from Fife. Joke from Nigeria. So look, just so many people all around the world coming to tune in to listen up to some of your great insights here. So coming back to your thought process around mental health and social media. I mean, why did you take that decision, and has that really made a difference?
It's been the best thing I've ever done. Honestly, it wasn't a thing. And I actually tried it. I've got a lot of friends in social media, of course, because I've been in the industry for a long time. And I tried it a few times in the past, when we all announce, right, I'm going to take a month off and digital detox or whatever. And there's like almost the announcement that you're about to step off. And it just never worked for me. And whilst I always managed it really well, I managed my notifications quite well. The amount of time that it sucks out of your day, even if it's just for that split moment, especially for someone with ADHD, that the one thing I can see and now my brain's gone somewhere else, right? So I actually used it. I saw Enno and Shana there, two of my friends at Climate Reality Ambassadors. guys like us, we're really trying to focus and double down on climate, and it's changing incredibly quickly. So Twitter's great for that, right? But included in all of that, the problem is when you get some of these topics that people really care about, there is so much negativity. It's exhausting. And people have apocalypse fatigue. You've got a certain amount of a hope budget that can be eroded quite quickly. And then obviously Trump, and I work for an American company, and there's all of that. And I just thought, I'm going to delete them and come off for a week. And then it was 2 weeks, and then a month, and then 2 months. And what happened, very slowly, I realized, A, I'm not missing out on anything. B, I'm spending a lot more time with my family. I was asking people how they're doing and actually setting up Zooms to have a lot of face-to-face with other people, just randoms that I've not, and people that reach me on LinkedIn would actually go and have a chat. I'd never do that in the past. And what it's done is it's given me the space to think and breathe about what it is that I really care about. So I've now got 3 books on the go. I'm writing 2. That wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't be building the practice I'm building at the moment had I not come off social media, because I would be distracted by other things. I'd be in a weed debating everything with some climate denier, or someone about the value of marketing, or or whatever. So it just works for me. And what it's done is my Amazon account has shot through the roof, because I'm now buying books every 2 days and reading a lot, and it's put my head in a much better place. Yeah, certainly a lot happier as a result. Yeah.
So Jeremy, when you're with what you've described, the risk is you don't really give yourself the time just to briefly pause to savor your achievements. It's always about what's next. So how do you sort of bank and lock in the great things you've done before they've sort of drifted off, displaced by other thoughts?
Gosh, that's a great question. Because of, how do I say this respectfully without oversharing? Because of a lot of the bad stuff that has happened, psychologically, we've all got our own stories to tell, right? But when you have a car crash and you almost die, when you go to the cash machine with your best friend, when you're both going bankrupt on the same day and you've got 20 quid and you're pretty much homeless and your house is repossessed, and the two of you are trying to decide, how do we split the £10 in half? And do we buy bread or petrol to go to a meeting where we can hopefully get a cash advance from a client, or do I just eat and have toast until Friday? When all of that stuff happens, and you have very messy divorces when your wife and your best friend are working for you and there's stuff going on that you weren't aware of, it puts you in a position where you spend a lot of time looking forward. I hate the word futurist a lot, and all of that terms in the baggage. None of us know what's going to happen in the future. I work in consulting for a big company. We need to build trusted relationships. But what I'm not going to do is make predictions about where the future is going to go to my clients so that they come, it doesn't work like that. Future is going to be different. We have no idea what's going to happen, right? What lockdown has helped me to do is to almost deal with some of that baggage, some of it through the notes that I don't share, to make sense of everything that's happened. So the reason I've got the career that I have now that really pivoted since March was because of that reflection. And if there's one thing I'd put it down to, it's Ikigai, the Japanese concept. I spent years thinking about we should just have our purpose and our why. Like Simon said, so that I want to do this so that this happens. Once I found my purpose, everything falls into place. No, it doesn't. Your contribution, your impact, great. Good luck. Well done, Simon. You can charge 75 grand a day to do your workshops to help people find their one sentence. Doesn't help you at work. Right? But you look at something like Ikigai, and that changes everything. 4 buckets. What do I love? What does the world need? What am I good at? What do I get paid for? And we've all got things we drop in those buckets. I'm sure you've seen the graphic on Instagram or Pinterest or something. The more we can figure out how to get those 4 buckets to overlap, the more you're going to have happiness and meaning and purpose at work, right? And you get paid for this. Because normally the things that you're good at and get paid for are your professional life. The things that you love and the world needs are sometimes your personal life and the causes you attach yourself to. And I've managed to get all 4 of those to overlap. That's probably the best piece of advice I could give anybody, actually. Lock yourself away with a bottle of your favorite thing and just draw those 4 circles and figure out how to get them to all overlap.
Yeah, I absolutely love that thought. And, I've used that on many occasions myself, Jeremy. And, so it's certainly become, very useful food for thought for me. And I certainly didn't know how much Cynic was charging these days. So that's useful.
It's about 150 now, I think. I tell you what, Ritchie, as well, that I only discovered a couple of weeks ago, which is also linked to the mental health. And I've been studying a lot of Japanese storytelling. And there's there's a process. I posted it on LinkedIn. Kisho Tenketsu. It's a Japanese style of storytelling. I had no idea it even existed until a few weeks ago. That was my hyper focus. Spent a week studying it. Turns out it's one of the most powerful forms of storytelling in the world that has no conflict in it. Whereas in the West, everything we do is based upon conflict. So villains, obstacles, bad things happen, heroes transform for the better, Aristotle's poetics, all that kind of stuff. Japan doesn't have that. It's development of a character where everyone tries to live harmoniously, happily ever after, and it's about the journey, not the end point. You look at things like that, which is linked to Ikigai. Ikigai is not actually an entrepreneurial model. It's about life and happiness and longevity. But I think that's where the important stuff is. And the West and our obsession with speed. What is it that Gandhi said? There's more to life than increasing its speed, right? Just because things are getting faster, progress isn't necessarily better. Anyway.
No, it's funny. And you reminded me of the Lost in Translation movie when you were talking about that sort of storytelling aspect. So Jeremy, we've got a question here, and certainly let's not make any future predictions, but Michelle's got an interesting question about future workforces and particularly, just around the new ways of working. So have things really changed in the office now, given remote working? Do you think that's going to be something that kind of sticks around for time to come? And specifically, Michelle's asking about what the impact on creativity may be as a consequence of that.
I chatted to Rory Sutherland about this about 18 months ago, and we were looking, because Rory had the idea at Ogilvy that you should never go in the office if you've got a job to do, like whether that's email or meetings and all your Zooms and stuff. And he's quite famously tells his team to stay at home in a happy surrounding where they're left to be more creative. I mean, if you could see the rest of my office now, it's just bookshelves and Post-it notes and posters and all sorts. I love being surrounded by my stuff. I'm far more creative. I can play my own tunes as loud as I want, right? Roy Southern used to tell people, if you're going to go in the office into a cubicle and do email, don't go in the office. It's the worst thing in the world that you can do. And we started to try that at IBM. Salesforce has a great culture of doing this. What's happening now is that people won't need to go back in. Maybe they'll go back in a day a week. I suspect in a few years' time, it will be a perk, not just that you get a desk because everyone's hot desking. The perk will be you're allowed in a building. Probably, and we'll look at smart buildings also, when you think impact on the planet, buildings are a huge problem with all of that. So I think it's probably going to completely change the way that we work. I'm probably going to go back a day a week. If that, I'm mentioning the same thing to my team. If you need to go in the office, this is what Rory was saying, which I think is as relevant now as it ever was. You only go in the office for the serendipitous meetings, to randomly bump into people. I mean, Nick and I did at Salesforce all the time. It's always around the canteen or, where the food or the fruit is, or the free Red Bull or the vodka fridge, wherever it was, you bump into random people, you have a chat. Oh, I've not seen you for ages. How are you doing? Oh, I'm working on this thing. Oh, if you chatted to Ritchie, do you know what I mean? And that's what I miss. And I miss going in the pub after work. And I miss the friendship and the relationships when we're all trying to make sense of the world, but not to go back in the office to work. I think if you want to be more creative, for most people, providing your house and your environment allows it, probably better staying at home. Save your commute time, put your commute time into something more productive, invest in yourself a bit more, right? Spend a bit more time with your family. There's no downside to that, surely.
Yeah, hallelujah. Particularly around the commute, which I've been going in occasionally, and it's really weird. It feels almost sort of indulgent and decadent to commute, whereas I absolutely used to bloody hate it.
I don't miss
but
that.
there's many positives that you talk to there. So Jeremy, you know a lot of really interesting people in the world, and so I'm interested to. Well, actually, there's two questions. I'm also going to fold in Jessica's questions. So, who's the person that you found most inspiring and why on your travels? And then I'll also drop in as well. You read a lot. What's your favorite book from Jessica? What's your favorite book of 2020? So there's a 2-for-1 there.
Oh my goodness. Favorite book of 2020. It's a cliche and don't hate me for it.
The Places You'll Go. No, sorry.
Obama's book is stunning.
Yeah.
It really is. It'll knock your socks off. It's prose. I mean, it's just beautiful, and he wrote it. It's beautifully, beautifully written. And it's just an amazing insight about the human side of being a president. He literally does show you behind the curtain, which is just awesome. And I'm a huge fan. He was a great speaker. He used to sing his speeches. I just love the way he communicates anyway, but, very beautiful person, who said one of my favorite quotes of all time: "You can change the world just by sharing your story." I love that quote. In terms of people that inspired me, it's hard not to have my climate hat on a little tiny bit, just because, I'm lucky enough to be in the boardrooms of some of the biggest companies in the world, where I believe we get the chance to change things from the inside. A lot of people don't have the privilege of that. So we look at grassroots movements. How do we try and change things from the outside, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Extinction Rebellion have seen the good and the dark side of that as well, and what it's like to try and throw rocks and glue yourself to shit. Stop doing that. I look at people like AOC in the, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the US, and Greta. You think about Greta, right? She's still only 17. In August 2018, she still didn't even know how social media worked. When she had no influential friends at all. There was nothing around her. She just sat outside Swedish Parliament. And I watched her documentary last week, I Am Greta, which is just brilliant, just as an insight into how, when she says no one is too small to make a difference, she genuinely lives that, which is awesome. But I think if I was to then look at like inspiration in terms of who is it that gets me out of bed and thinks that's the kind of career that I'd love to have, which is really Ikigai at its best, probably Jane Goodall and David Attenborough. Just phenomenal humans. Attenborough's now 94, and I think Jane's about 86. They're still doing what they love. David Attenborough lives just down the road from me, and I've passed him a couple of times on my bike. Just beautiful humans that are just still got this childlike curiosity and playfulness, but whilst dealing with some pretty dark stuff. I like those two a lot.
Not to bring the conversation back to marketing too much, but obviously Attenborough was the fastest person to hit 1 million followers on Instagram. I think he beat Jennifer Aniston record. It was like under 3 hours or something. So clearly a guru in that way as well.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I'd love to pick up, Jeremy. Over the years, what I think has been remarkable. Clearly, you're probably one of the guys who kind of latched onto social media quite early on, and as a consequence, was able to carve out somewhat of a personal brand. And you talked about your potential, your possible evangelistic kind of career path that you were potentially taking until you kind of maybe pivoted on that. But it'd be great to hear from you, some of your sort of top tips and thoughts around others who maybe are thinking about a similar kind of ability to create that personal brand, perhaps on social or other ways. What are some of the things that you would say would be helpful, as you've maybe done in the past as well?
Did you ask Ritson that question?
I'm not sure he gave me a straight answer.
Did he shout things and swear at the screen?
Yeah. Basically. He gave us a really good, he talked about a parallel sort of professor and how, the personal brands were made on the back of that. But,
I know how much he loves that term. I'm not a huge fan of it either. I think, in fact, one of the, for all of his sins, Gary Vaynerchuk occasionally says something useful. And I remember chatting to him a long time ago about this, and it shaped a lot about the way that I thought. And he did, it was back when he did Wine Library TV. It's long gone now. I think he's even taken them all down. Do you remember the Wine Library when he started years and years ago? And he did an episode on Britney. I think Britney was either coming back or she was doing something in Vegas. And he was talking to one of her DJs, and he said, like, the future belongs to the DJs. And I'm a huge EDM fan. I love electronic dance and Garrix and Tomorrowland and all of that. And I really like that idea. And the more I kind of dug into the idea of what that meant, all he was saying is DJing is just remixing old stuff and making it into something new for a new audience. And I've been in rooms with people, especially young people, trying to build their own brand, where they've maybe even thrown something out on LinkedIn that's had a few thousand views. And they were like, yay, I'm on my way to, and I've got some engagement, some likes. And yet how quickly they get shot down by some people in industry who should know better about, you're so full of shit. That was so 2016. I saw that at Cannes 3 years ago. And this is a young person just trying to do something right to the best of their, they don't know any different. And I remember being in a room actually with someone that was in tears saying, that's it. I'm never going to try and build my brand at all. As if you need to earn your stripes, get your money, get a big C-suite title, and then you've got the position to talk about stuff. The idea of a DJ is that, no, I'm just going to remix all the stuff that I've seen that inspires me. I'm going to package it in a way that I like, and then I'm going to spin it out to my audience who may have never been privy to seeing that. You know, most of the people I work with don't have a direct interest in climate, but I can package it in a way that helps them to be interested and engaged, you know, or it might be around the work with Stop the Traffic, you know, human trafficking. That's dark. You know, how do you get people to engage on that? But you repackage it. So to adopt the mindset of a DJ also reduces the stigma of, you know, I don't care about the numbers. And I hate the word influence. You know, you're trying to force people to do things that they wouldn't normally have done, you know, this power play. But if you just see yourself as a DJ and you're just curating existing content, now there's no pressure. I don't have to come up with something original and then wait for the shitstorm in the comments when people like, that's never been original. He did it 15 years ago. So yeah, future belongs to the DJs.
Future belongs to the DJs. Is that the role you do around climate? I mean, is it? Do we need new ideas, or just to get galvanized around the original? Actually, maybe just I'll flip the question into we've talked about climate. You mentioned Greta. You're probably closer to the inner workings of what's going on. Can you give us maybe an optimistic view about climate from what you know, or is that possible to give an optimistic view?
I'm sure we can find a link and put it in the show notes. McKinsey did a report at the beginning of the year that they showed actually how COVID may help to accelerate, you know, a positive or a more positive outcome for climate, because we don't actually have technology problems. You've got people running around talking about carbon capture and all the things we need to do. You know, we've got to invent all these new technologies. You don't. We have people problems. They're all political problems. The political problems around why is, I don't know, fossil fuel companies are getting 35 times more subsidies than green energy. You know, it's a people problem. It's not a technology problem. What we're seeing with governments and with large groups of people, when they're forced to act, we can do some pretty amazing stuff when we put our mind to it, you know. And what reports like that McKinsey one that I read is actually quite optimistic. You know, you look at things like United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we're miles behind on where we should be in the run up to 2030. But there's also loads of really good stuff. There's a great book called Progress by Johan, somebody whose second name I forgot, big yellow book. And Progress is all about the positive state of the world. And actually things are much better than they ever have been. And we have lots of reasons to be hopeful. And this is the challenge, right? We could get in the weeds talking about climate stats and stuff, but people just switch off. Nobody gets inspired by numbers. I think about things in terms of hope budgets. And this is what we've got to think about. Whoever you're talking to, most important thing is just to talk about it, or at least to find a little bit out about it, right? And everyone's got a different capacity for hope. And some people have more than others. You talk to a climate activist and they'll talk to you all day long in the pub. You go and talk to my mum and maybe you've got 5 minutes if you're lucky and put it in language that she can understand. With all respect to my mum, I love you to bits. But the hope budget is, at what level does your hope get eroded? Because the more information you get, the more you want to act. But it also gets to the point with cognitive load, or just with, you know, you get overwhelmed, you just switch off. You're like, well, what can one person do? 70% of global emissions are from, you know, a very, very small handful of companies. So you're like, well, we'll leave it to them to fix it. So the challenge is understanding for each individual, which is a great marketing question because it's understanding customer segments and behaviors. At what point, just before that hope budget gets eroded, do you talk about, let's do something, let's watch a documentary, let's read a book? Because if you give them too much, which is what often people do, people just switch off. You know, complexity of choice, you know, Unilever, CPG, you get too many toothbrushes, science shows that you don't make any decision. You get the complexity of choice. Whereas if you just get a few in a time scale that works for you, you know, that's where marketers really should be at the front lines, because they're the best storytellers and we understand, you know, those types of behaviors.
Jeremy, the ultimate marketing challenge, as I think
it is. It's the storytelling. It's the communication problem. Yeah, for sure. Which is a social media challenge as well. The network effects of respectfully sharing good content that's going to gather its own legs.
Yeah. I mean, look, we've got 2 minutes to run. I've got 2 great questions here lined up for you. I'm going to go for 2 in 1 for this from our audience. Peter Davison asks, can you talk about your process for building insights? Does the data help make a story, or is it the story? So, a bit circular. The next question from Richard Brown, brand guru. How good are you at just sitting there with your brain simply idling? He likes your quote, sometimes I just sit and think, and sometimes I just sit. It's not easy these days, is it? So what's your take?
In 2 minutes, Nancy Duarte, who's a great communications coach, talks about how every presentation should just have one star moment. And I really like that phrase, the star moment, something they'll always remember. So whenever I'm building narratives, certainly for our bigger deals that, these are 7, 8, 9-figure deals, you've got to start off with a number because, and there's got to be confidence in the number. But there's never going to be more than 4, and often there's only going to be one big number. We call them magic numbers. But once I've got that, I need to park it because it's all about the narrative and not the number. So then what I'll basically do is try and reverse engineer the story, just like you would with the way that Dan Brown or J.K. Rowling would write a book. They write the last page first, so they know what happens, and then they work all the way back to the front. It's the same thing when you're doing commercial storytelling. It's exactly the same process. You still have peaks and troughs and conflicts and obstacles and all that kind of stuff. But then what you're trying to do is work it back to that number to show what the outcome is going to be. But it's got to be human. And here's the challenge. The way that the brain is wired, if you just look at numbers, you inform, educate, and solve a problem, and it's all right brain. It's all left brain. We're not wired to make decisions based upon our left brain words and language. We're actually wired to make decisions based upon how we inspire, how we entertain, excite, and how we challenge people. And that's only going to come with a human story. So business needs to stop leading with authority and numbers and cost takeout and ROI and please buy my stuff. Because people still don't do it because you've not connected emotionally with them. You've got to make them feel something first. So you tell an emotional story with humanity and empathy. That's why Aristotle was a genius. Pathos, logos, ethos, the rhetorical appeals. You've got to have that wrapped around your numbers. And you can't have just one or the other because marketers do too many creative things and then there's no economics. So that falls over as well. You've got to understand the fine balance in the middle.
That sounds great. Jeremy, look, we've literally just clocked out of time. Mark, over to you.
Well, I mean, it's a cliche and we've said it a few times, but, it's gone past in a flash and we literally, I think, could have gone on and on and on. Jeremy, it's been brilliant. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll do a crummy job of trying to summarize what I think we've heard, but we've heard about hope budgets, about being a DJ, so many gems and wisdom and optimism just sort of shines through. Ikigai, which some have heard of, some haven't. But perhaps more than anything, the power of storytelling. And you've given us an insight into how that works for you and the impact it can have on even the biggest issues on the world. And so I just want to say a massive thank you, and also really excited about the stories yet to be told by Jeremy Waite in 2021 and beyond. So thank you so much for your time, Jeremy.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for joining, everyone. Merry Christmas.
Jeremy, just for me, the one thing that stayed with me more than anything was your story around you had 20 quid going to the bank account, and you could either eat toast or go to a client meeting. It really sums up your level both of resilience, but actually you don't call yourself a futurist. But I'm hoping you went to the client meeting and then the rest is history type thing.
I did.
But it very much is, that for me, it really sums up your personality, right? The ability to kind of bounce back, the ability to kind of see things in an optimistic way. So absolutely loved, chatting with you. We could have done this for another hour or two at least. But I'm sure we'll get the opportunity to in the future in 2021 as well. So
Drinks in the new year.
And thank you for everyone joining in today. It was lovely seeing everyone from all around the world. It was an absolute pleasure having you. Some great questions coming through, some great community chat. So lots of love for Jeremy. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic Christmas.
And a quick note for me, for many of you don't know who I am, I just want to say a massive thank you as well. I'm the guy that keeps popping up in your inbox. So I appreciate you all supporting. And later on today, I'm going to send out an email offering for you to come jump on a Zoom call with me and tell me everything you love and maybe the things that you don't necessarily love about the show, what we can do more or less of, because we want to make sure we can do more and do better. So I will send that shortly. But again, thank you for giving us your time, because that's one thing you can't get back.